Thanks everybody for coming to the last faculty staff forum for this semester. And today we're really lucky to have Dr. Eric Jamelske from the economics department. He runs a student mentoring research machine over in the economics department with lots of students involved. It's really very exciting, and for the last several years they've been working on two projects. You're going to talk about both of them, right? Yep. The viewpoints about climate change, both in the US and in China, and then how we can get our kids to eat more healthy fruits and vegetables. So I'll turn it over to Eric. Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Karen. Thanks. Nice. And thanks for the opportunity, Karen and everybody else, and thanks to you guys for coming. I should point out that several of the folks in the room are actually some of my current research students, so maybe if we could just get them to raise their hands really quickly. You're included, right? Go ahead, right? So you can just kind of see, right? A couple of brand new people that are going to just be joining, and then some others, right? Yeah, so that's how this works. I have to recruit. So yeah, I'm going to talk about projects, partnerships, students, and a teeny bit about the resources, because this wouldn't be possible. And of course, we have to celebrate the power of and. So I hope I did a good enough job of that. All right. And we have to live with this wiggling thing, because apparently it's been explained to me that just jostles a little bit, and so there's nothing we can do. So hopefully you won't get dizzy as you listen. Oh, I have to turn this back on. Cool. Yeah. So I guess what I'm thinking to myself is, how does this happen? So I might as well just start with the acknowledgement and the thanks, right? I'm grateful for a variety of support, including sort of a lot of money to make this happen, from Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, Blue Gold Commitment, differential tuition stuff, and some specific programs like the International Fellows Program makes a lot of my work possible. We also have to interact with the Institutional Review Board, because we're often doing surveys and collecting data, and so anytime you're using human subjects in your research, you have to clear some hurdles in terms of how you're sort of progressing with that. So we interact with them. Back in 2013-14, I took a sabbatical and went to China for 70 days with 4 students, and that was a very important part of getting this work going. The economics department, the Watershed Institute, right, these people support me very much as well, and I have an array of community and international partners that make this possible. So I figure I'll start with what is economics, because you might be wondering, why does an economist study these things that might not naturally seem to be under the umbrella of what most people would think economics is. Like, I thought you guys studied the stock market and unemployment rates and, you know, jobs and things, and so, you know, economics is the study of how a society would manage its scarce resources. We can't have everything we want and desire, so we're going to have to make some choices about what we want to produce and how to produce it and who gets it. And so 2 examples of that might be like, what energy sources do we use and what sort of infrastructure would we develop for transportation, heat, production, and other sorts of things, right? And I'll just say fossil fuels, right? It's something to do with that. What food is produced, where is it sold, what are the prices of these various kinds of food, you know, who has access to what kinds of foods, and what do people like to eat? And then that just funnels me into this notion of obesity in our society, right? And so I'm thinking to myself that this notion of how we use our resources and the choices we make are super important and actually fall very nicely under the umbrella of what economics studies. So I look for, when I'm doing my research projects, I look for policy relevant, right, and related to economics, and some overlap with other disciplines. So economics is not the only discipline that's interested in obesity and climate change. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with other disciplines, and I have a lot of collaborators from different fields, and by the way, a lot of students from different fields. I don't just work with economics students. So international views on climate change issues and policy climate change might be one of the most pressing global issues of our time, and it has the potential to have significant and great costs for our society. What should we do? And the countries that I'll show you a little bit of information on in our work are United States and China is where my focus is, but we were able to actually get some information on Vietnam as well, so that I can share. With respect to child health and nutrition, we're mostly interested in increasing children's fruit and vegetable consumption in the context of poor eating habits and health risks that persist into adulthood, which can be very costly, right? And we work with area schools or programs and things to make that happen. So climate change. I conduct surveys online, face-to-face. I use an array of university professors in the United States and China to help me get the data. I have to work with university administration sometimes to get permission for these things, as well as support. And I also utilize an organization called Survey Sampling International to help me get some survey data that might be maybe more randomly distributed across the country rather than being able to access from just people that I know or something like that. So that helps a lot. With respect to fruits and vegetables, we run experiments and we observe behavior. We're mostly working in schools, but we have to have the cooperation of the school administration and the food service people, and often the teachers are the hardest ones to sort of get reined in terms of getting them to, I'll just say, cooperate or participate the way that we would like. And of course, when I try to write this all up, well, if I'm always busy collecting data and designing the new project and working with massive amounts of students, then I simply just don't have time left to do a lot of writing. But I can partner with people who sort of have an interest in the same things, and then they can sort of take on some of the burden of the writing, and I can become more of an editor with respect to these peer-reviewed publications, is kind of the way this is worked out. Some of my partners that help me write are University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire folks, and some of them are from other institutions. So I need to get viable data, right? So planning is really the most important thing, and you can never start too early to begin to plan to make this happen with your partners. With respect to climate change, some of the challenges that we've had are the number of observations that we can get, and we're always looking for more data, so larger data sets are going to be important. But then within that context, do we have data that might be representative such that the results might generalize to broader populations rather than just for a specific sort of a narrow population? That's a constant challenge for us, and a lot of that is associated with limited resources, right? How do you get these sort of representative samples? And of course, anytime you're doing surveying, people always ask, did people understand your survey question? You know, are they answering appropriately? Is your data actually realistic, right? Those kinds of things. So those are things we constantly are challenged with, right? Does your survey have any biases in it? Those kinds of things. With respect to fruits and vegetables, we're trying to partner with schools, and that often means that you're working with sort of one school, and if you're doing that, then maybe you automatically have a reduced population of a specific demographic or something. For example, the current school that I'm working with is a West Central Wisconsin elementary school that is out in a little bit of a rural area, and so you might sort of imagine what the demographics of that school might be. Largely homogeneous Caucasian population, right, and maybe not as low income as some other areas. And so often in the literature, people are really interested in, you know, racial and ethnic diversity, as well as maybe socioeconomic diversity. And in some studies, sometimes you just don't get that, right? But you just work with who you can work with, and you do the best that you can. We still have the issues associated with the generalizable results. And one big thing about being in the schools is, do they really want you there? Are they welcoming you there? And even if they do, right, do they then in practice, right, do it? So how long will they let you be there? How much will they do for you are kind of big challenges, okay? And especially with the teachers, what role are they playing, and will they actually do the things that you sort of bargained with them to do? My student teams are interdisciplinary. I'm always on the lookout for talented, interested students. You know, some people will interview people, they will screen them, they'll look at their GPAs, and I'm pretty much just giving presentations and saying, if you're interested in this, come talk to me. And what I look at is if someone bothered to come see me and say they were interested, I feel like I'm going to give that person a shot and a chance, right? I don't look up their GPA, I don't look up anything about them, and I just sort of then lay the groundwork from there. That's kind of the way that I do it. I want to provide the opportunities to people who show an interest. There are a variety of majors, as I said. I'm going to try to engage them in really every phase of the research, and not so much the actual writing of the peer-reviewed publications that come from this, but they sort of witness the writing process. They see the presentation and the raw data. They see a draft of a paper. They see reviewer comments come back from the journal and me making some revisions. And finally, if they're lucky enough, they'll see their name as an acknowledgement on a final published project that may end up being 2.5 years after they began working on it and things. That's kind of just the way the industry works, right? But that you know, that's the limitation of where their work extends or their experiences. I want to work with students as long as possible. It seems mean, but if a student comes to me and they're like, I'm only going to be here for one more semester, this student is not going to have a place on my research team, because I want to work with people for a minimum of a year and more likely 1.5 years or 2 years, right? And the reasoning for this is that I can then create these teams where some people are experienced and on for quite some time and other people are just joining, and then that forms a really nice interaction such that those new students can grow into, get Nate and Jake, grow into some leadership roles eventually, right? And they sort of see that interaction happen. So a mix of new and experienced students, and of course that leadership and teamwork that just shines in the work that we do. And of course I have to be flexible, but the students also have to be flexible, because we got to find times to meet and work, and often that means carving out regularly scheduled meetings during the semester where I've got, you know, 18 kids trying to balance across my teaching schedule and their busy lives, et cetera. And then maybe we have to get together in evenings or weekends when we're really trying to produce something and meet a deadline. And we just have to have really good communication to make this work, and a lot of flexibility, right, to make this all happen. So this would be the current list of the students that are involved in the 2 projects. And so currently I have 18 students, 9 on each project. And you can see that they arrange in, some people are like double majors and minors and things, but this would be the coverage of sort of the different disciplines and backgrounds of the students that I'm working with. And I often like to tap into the honors program, and I just did the other night, Monday night, and dinner with the honors, and always try to recruit some honors students to be joining in on the team, because let's face it, honors students are awesome, right? Who doesn't want to work with them? So yeah, so that'd be an example. And you know, when we disseminate our findings with respect to the students, they're basically doing an array of presentations. I am getting ready to take literally all my 18 students on the road, and we're going to be in Stevens Point at the Wisconsin Economics Association conference coming up November 17th and 18th, and we really shine there. And you know, Karen, you'll know a little bit about this when you go to these other places and you see, right, you can see the sort of the Eau Claire difference, right, in respect to the way undergraduate students get these opportunities, and it really comes back to the dedication and resources put to it, and then the faculty to take advantage of them. And so it's really nice to see our students sort of shining over and above what we see other students do. And it's not to to sort of put them down in any way. It's just that they don't have the available resources, and often a faculty is just going to be sort of meeting with them once a week and giving them a little guidance. And so what do you expect that they're going to do? Whereas with the work that these guys are doing, I'm at the table with them every day, right? I'm bringing them kind of along for the ride. So they get to present in the fall in the Wisconsin Economics Association meeting with oral presentations. They are scheduled to do an entire session and then another session. So the climate change kids have an entire hour-long session, and then so too do the fruit and vegetable kids. Sometimes my students get selected to go participate in the posters on the rotunda in the Capitol here in Madison. Thank you for the opportunity for them to be able to do that. Of course, Council on Undergraduate Research has posters on the Hill, and I've never been lucky enough to be selected for that. Well, it's a lot of work, right? So it's heavy lifting, and you know, I've been selected as an honorable mention a couple times, and that's great. The kids really appreciate that. But easier to send them to the national conference, which last year was in Memphis, and I think this year is in Oklahoma. So I plan to send some kids there. The climate change kids we found this conference that's sponsored by Bard College and Vassar College, and up in upstate, sort of upstate-ish New York. It's not upstate, right? It's between Albany and New York City, but and there's an Asia and the Environment Conference. So hey, talking about climate change and what Chinese people think, sort of right in our wheelhouse, and so we're able to send some of our students there, right? And then we have, obviously, the things right in our own backyard, right? So the UW System Research Symposium is a really great place for them to go. And I actually weasel my students in. So they say do an oral or a poster. And what I do is I apply for an oral, and then I call the people up and I say, we have posters, can we put them up? And, you know, they're like, you're weird. And I'm like, yeah, but can we do it, right? And of course they say yes, and so we sort of get exposure. And if you think about it, giving an oral presentation like I'm doing right now is a very sort of a different experience than standing in a poster. When you do an oral presentation and you're part of a team of 9, you literally are going to be taking your share, right? And then maybe fielding some questions at the end. And it's always very limited. Like you have 12 minutes to present and three minutes for discussion. But when you're at a poster, people can walk up, they can look at the poster, and you can actually walk them all the way through the whole poster. And because we have so much work, we never just have one poster. We then take them to the next poster, and they get to walk them through 3 posters, right? So it's a really great experience for the students to be able to do both. And of course, I try to do both here. But people tell me, again, there's limitations there, but can my students present orally at the Provost Honor Symposium, and can they show their posters, right, at the sort of research day type thing, right? I'll go present at the Midwest Economics Association sometimes in March. I give talks around the community. Jeremy tapped me in October to do a talk for his group, right? I try to do guest lectures in classes, and anytime I can bring my students along with me for those sorts of things, that's really good, a bonus for them to see that process. And again, ultimately, I'm going to be trying to publish this. And again, the students aren't really actively involved in the publication and the writing, but they kind of see the process, especially if they're on the team for 1.5 to 2 years. So let's talk a little bit about some of the work that we actually do, rather than the process behind it, right? And get some data. So I'm going to say, suppose I told you that I study this fresh fruit and vegetable snack program in schools, and that kids eat more. The kids typically, when you serve them fruit as a snack in school, they kind of eat it, right? And they kind of eat vegetables more than you might think, but they eat vegetables less than the fruits. And schools then tailor these programs such that they minimize waste by serving more fruits than vegetables. But then if you say, well, what's the root cause of this healthy eating and maybe obesity on your mind? Fruit has some sugar in it, right? And vegetables might be a better target. And given that kids don't like to eat them as much, maybe we could focus on vegetables. So what I wanted to do was find a school in the area that would be willing to partner with me that does not have and never did have the USDA fresh fruit and vegetable program, and create a vegetable snack program with that school, and then layer it with some things. So we're going to work closely with the food service director and the principal to sort of organize this. Then we're going to bring the teachers on board, and we're going to focus on vegetables. And we're not saying eat a raw vegetable and here's some dip to put on it, right? We're, no dip, no dressing, just vegetables, right? Things like planning, like what are the snacks going to be? When are they going to be served? How consistent can we be in this, right? How much time will we be in the school? And so my student researchers, a small team of them, 14 to be exact, went back and forth to this school every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to prepare and serve and, right, take the empty things and record all the data collection. And we were lucky enough to have the resources to be able to pay those students a little bit of money, cover their transportation, right, give them service learning, et cetera, and also pay for these vegetables that were actually served, right? So we're going to implement this in classrooms, and what seemed to work best was their kindergarten through 3rd grade already had a scheduled snack time that was bring your snack from home and you can have a milk. And so we sort of piggybacked on that and said, let's try to work with those teachers. So kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, each grade had 3 classes, so you can see there's 12 teachers that we're working with here. And we're going to serve them grape tomatoes, baby carrots, and green pepper strips. And we're going to do that 3 days a week, basically over a 2-month period, such that we are getting 8 servings of each of those vegetables, okay? So again, this predetermined menu and repetition of certain snacks, right? And a reasonable amount of time to be able to see patterns develop, okay? The other important thing here is what we're doing is we're going to create varying encouragement conditions. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But in these 12 classrooms, we assigned them to be a different level of encouragement with respect to eating these fruits and vegetables. And so what's my primary measure? So you can kind of imagine that we're going to get a weight of a snack served. And so the snack is going to be an individual little plastic cup, and it's going to have a unique ID number on it. All this stuff's pre-prepared, so every kid has an ID number. They know their ID number. We prepare these, we weigh them, we deliver them on trays to the classroom, right? And then when it comes back, we can record it. But what are we actually recording? And the answer is the cup has some weight itself. So we want to weigh the cup and know what it weighs empty. Then we want to weigh the cup with the snack in it, right? And then we want to send it off with empty cup and cup with the snack in it for every kid, by ID number on a sheet, and you'll see a sample sheet. I think I might have one in here if I didn't put it in. You can just imagine ID numbers here, empty cup weight, and then pre-weight, which is the cup plus the snack. And of course, when it comes back, it's going to either be empty, or it's going to be untouched, or it's going to be partially eaten, right? So what I'm really saying here is I'm going to measure the proportion consumed, such that the pre-weight minus the post-weight. Now, if both those have the cup included, the cup weight just washes out, right? But then when I divide by the pre-weight, which was the starting weight, I actually have to subtract the cup weight out of it, otherwise I will be understating what they're actually consuming. Of course, they can consume at most 100% and at least 0%, right? And this is individual data for 215 kids, basically, for 24 servings of 3 different vegetables over this time period, which is pretty awesome. And we had these awesome digital scales that measure things to within 1/100th of a gram. I'll mention it here, but I don't have the slide that shows it. We had to be very consistent within a narrow range of error in how much we served kids, because you can imagine if you start serving them bigger portions, then maybe the percentage they eat goes down, right? And you don't want that, so we had to consistently serve them the same weight of snack across all kids across every serving of each individual vegetable. So my encouragement groups are 1 set of teachers, 1 from each grade. Did nothing. Snacks arrive, teacher says snacks are here. That's it, right? Another one is moderate encouragement to try, taste, and eat, and I'll say in a minute what that might be. And then another group was actually some higher level of encouragement beyond that, right? In particular, we are going to only implement the encouragement activities for the 1 through 6 servings. Serving 7 and 8, the teachers were told to stop the act of encouragement to see whether or not there was any persistence in terms of maybe any higher consumption that we could find from the encouragement when teachers were no longer actively encouraging the kids to eat, right? And the teachers had some input in this, so we gave them some scripts and we had some meetings and we had some things that we wanted them to try to do, but we basically said let this develop organically, maybe peer-to-peer interaction of kids and conversation and all these kinds of things that they would do. The one caveat is that we gave them a yellow legal pad empty and asked them to take notes on what they did, and most of them came back kind of empty. So you can see again that the teachers, right, that they'll do a minimum amount of stuff for you, right? Now you'll see that they actually must have been doing what they're doing because of the data that we collected. But again, anytime you can make something easy for the group of people that you're asking to help you generate data, it's going to be good. So I don't know exactly what these teachers were doing. I just know a little bit about what we asked them to do, right? And so we'll see how that all turns out. So at the end of the day, you can just imagine a menu that was created and maybe a couple of days where we didn't want to do the measurement because maybe they had a pep rally that day, maybe they had a parade that day or something, and Halloween might be just a day that you want to stay away from or something like that for a variety of reasons. But so that's what we did, right? And so I'm just going to show you, right? Proportion consumed. And at the end of the day, I like getting right in my data. I'm just going to focus on the first serving, right? So for tomatoes, we can easily see that 0.265 across all the kids that were in these classrooms, 0.407 and 0.563. I'm not going to do statistical tests for you, but I will tell you that this is different than that, that's different than that, and obviously that's different than that. So we can show with strong statistical certainty that those consumption levels are higher for the various levels of encouragement group. You can kind of see everybody going down a little bit, but I want to draw your attention right over to here, where once they settle into their consumption norms, the important thing here is what? Is that didn't decline. It stayed right on par, meaning that when teachers were no longer encouraging their students, the kids continued to eat at a higher rate, right? Even without the act of encouragement, okay? If I show you that the next slide is tomatoes, I'm sorry, not tomatoes, but carrots, what do you think it might look like? I mean, maybe it'll look very similar to this in some way, but there might be some important difference. What might that difference be? Yeah, the whole thing just bumps up because carrots, kids know them more, they tend to like them, but tomatoes maybe not as much, right? And so once again, you can see here this intertwinedness here, but the high encouragement is clearly higher, right? And statistical tests show that these are all different, but statistical tests here show that those aren't really different, right? But they all show that this is completely different than those, meaning that high encouragement matters more than moderate encouragement for carrots. Now, of course, it matters more for tomatoes too, right? But here the instance is moderate encouragement doesn't seem to matter next to no encouragement. And if I show you peppers, what do you expect to happen? Maybe back down again, right? So again, thinking to myself about how this is believable, right? And here it's interesting that these are the ones that are kind of intertwined, right? And that's lower, right? And so I can't get any statistical significance here, and I can't even really get statistical significance here, even though that's different than that all the way. But what's interesting here is you can kind of see that continue to dip down, whereas this is sort of staying more level, which is potentially suggestive of the notion that there seems to be a differential there in terms of the persistence, where high encouragement might lead to more persistence even after the encouragement is removed. And so at the end of the day, what did I do? I can just aggregate up all the vegetables that were eaten, and I can tell you that these guys ate 1.67 times more than that group, and these guys ate basically 1 1/3, so 1 1/3, 1 2/3 more, right? And you know, because we aggregated it up across 24 servings, right, with 200 and some kids each time, we're really talking about pounds of food, right? Which is, I think, impressive, right? You know, I mean, almost 60 pounds of food compared to 35 seems like a good way to just end that presentation. So that will end the presentation, and here would be a way of looking at the kids out there in their world of presenting, maybe some of the places where we did our measuring, et cetera, and things like that. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly move on to climate change and say, well, why might I be interested in these countries? So China and the United States are the largest economies. They're the two largest absolute greenhouse gas emitters in the world. One is a developed country and one is a developing country, but with rapid economic growth and rising wealth very quickly. And they're kind of the poster children for failed international agreements associated with reaching an accord of global reductions. And we don't have to talk, but basically in the news, it seems that Syria has now also decided to sign on to the Paris Accord, leaving the United States as, gosh darn, the only country in the world that's saying, we thumb our noses at this thing, which is just embarrassing. But at the end of the day, maybe Vietnam might be interesting because they've been identified by the World Bank and other organizations as perhaps being one of the countries that stands to lose the most. And by that, not because they have the most, but actually because they don't have much, right? They're much poorer and they depend heavily on rice for food and rice for exports, right? And climate change threatens them with respect to the fact that they're a very narrow country with a lot of coastline and lots of problems with respect to drought and flooding that would happen. So at the end of the day, they have different populations, different GDP and stuff, and I would probably like to tell you more about them, but I don't have time. So at the end of the day, and this is, I have 2017 data, I have 2015 data, I have 2013 data, I even have some data from 2011 from China and the US. But this is just from the 2015-16 iteration, where the Vietnam data came from the beginning of 2016, and the data from the US and China came from 2015. And so you can see we have 9,000 survey respondents across the three countries, and you can see that we used a variation of convenient sampling and online sampling and survey sampling international to help, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I have a lot of survey data on these three countries to be able to show some stuff. And our survey includes questions on, is climate change happening? What are the primary causes? How concerned are you? Do individual people have an obligation to do something about climate change in their lives? Do you understand what scientists think about this in terms of the degree of consensus? And how confident are you about maybe some of these things that you could assess being sure or unsure about? We also ask about support for an international treaty such as the Paris Accord and willingness to pay for climate change action, assuming that it will have costs associated with it. And we also have a bunch of data where we just ask people, tell us what you think when you hear the words climate change, right? And it's really hard for me to analyze that data because I'm not an experienced textual researcher guy, but I got some folks that are helping and we're struggling and I'm always looking for new partners. This is going to focus on these questions and this question right here. I'm not going to show you anything about those, but if people want to know about them, that's great. So I have 8 survey questions, which basically are these right here, right? So a question on that, 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 and then confidence is associated with that, and that, right? So I have 8 survey questions, and without showing you the way that I did this, I assigned scores based on the degree to which we could, how a person's answer was in line with actual scientific reality. So for example, if you said that climate change wasn't happening, or you said that it was mostly caused by natural occurrences, right, then you're going to get a lower score than if you actually said, yeah, you know, it is happening, because it is, right? Okay, so at the end of the day, we're really saying to ourselves, can we sort of create a scale of climate change acceptance, knowledge, understanding, concern, etc., right? And it actually mimics work done by another group, so I'm going to sort of, well, I didn't put that slide in there. But some other researchers have done the 6 Americas, and what they say is in America, we are very diverse in our views and our opinions on climate change, such that we're sort of spread out all over the map. Now, the majority of people say, yes, it's happening. Maybe close to a majority say that it's primarily human caused, but a significant number don't, and I can share the background data if you want. But at the end of the day, could I show in my data that the United States views on climate change, as referenced by these questions and their responses from each respective country, could I show a wider sort of array of views in the US than I saw in China, was basically what I was attempting to do. So at the end of the day, I'm going to end up assigning a score based on people's responses for every respondent, all the way to -10 for the person who's just completely out of touch with reality, to a +10, right? And this is what you get, right? So again, in the interest of time and getting people involved with questions, the blue is the United States, and the easy thing to see is the United States is sort of way spread out. You don't see anybody in the other countries over here, and even here you see far less as a % of them, right? And immediately you see China being sort of a little more bunched up, right? But you see Vietnam even more so. The mean, that's just a mean of a whole bunch of numbers from -10 to 10. You can see that in terms of that score, they're 6, almost 6.5. They're just a little over 4, and US is the lowest. Standard deviation is the highest, the next highest, and this is high by a lot, which is indicating that views are significantly more diverse. So we're able to kind of mimic, using our own methodology, the research results that other people have shown, right, about the United States views being more diverse. And by the way, we can easily see that if you just draw the line at, are you on the plus or minus, so using 0, we can see that approaching a quarter of US people are to the left, where much less of the other ones. So many ways to slice this data and just tell that story. So finally, we might say, what about this climate change treaty? Do people support it, right? Do you support your country being a participant? And so since we have different languages, I can promise you I can only read the top one, right? But it says, I think, the same thing. And so let's just quickly look at this, right? What if we asked some people, should your country join an international climate treaty, the Paris Accord, right? And it was framed such that people knew that we were talking about the Paris Accord, and in 2015 in the summer, it was upcoming in November, December, and people were talking about it. So we were referencing something real that people knew about, potentially, and we said, do you support your country doing it? So this is the United States, and we asked some other people, do you support your country participating in this treaty, right, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if it's known that China is not going to participate, right? So I can sort of see if there's any reciprocity. And the point is, really quickly, you can easily see what? That if the lighter bars are actually associated with the known participation of China, then we can easily see that people in the United States are less willing to support their country joining this international treaty to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if they know that China is not also going to be a player in that treaty, right? And it's easily seen here in the means, where when you add up a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 for what people responded, you get 3.85 and you get 3.49. These numbers are different, and I can say that with statistical certainty at the 99% level, right, or 1% level, however you speak the language, right? So at the end of the day, there's a strong and non-trivial withdrawal of support when it's known that another important country is not going to participate. If I show you the China graph, the first thing you see is that the whole support is pushed out, meaning they're more likely to say their country should join this treaty compared to people in the US. But the interesting thing is, you still get what? You still get that drop in support when it's known that the United States isn't going to be a player. So a very consistent result in terms of the support if it's known that the other important country is not going to participate. And then finally, if I show you the data on Vietnam, how many people feel like they're going to fall in line with the same exact story? Boom, right? Again, this notion of less support. So 4.37, 3.86, statistically significant. So we get a very consistent result of a higher level of support in the 2 Asian countries in general, unconditionally, right, than in the US. But then in all three countries, from whatever unconditional level of support they have when you never mention another country, that support is withdrawn in a significant manner when it's known that another important country, and by the way, the country here was the US as a known non-participant, okay? And then there's some pictures. This actually is the apartment that we rented in Chengdu just literally this last June, right? And so these people are all our Chinese research assistants. There was literally 17 of them all together that we sort of coordinated to be helping us do these surveys out there. This is in Guangzhou, that's in Sichuan and Chengdu, but it's also in, that's in 2015, this is in 2017, and this are my kids and Dr. Bolter and myself, and we are in, at that conference at Bard College in New York. And so at the end of the day, one more time, we have some time for some questions, and I don't really have to go anywhere right away. Some people might have to leave, but obviously this doesn't work without sort of all of the support and resources available at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, as well as the partners I'm able to connect with. So that's what I have for you all today.
Just a quick thing, if you are asking a question, can you wait for me to come around with the mic before you ask? Thanks.
So anybody have any questions or anything?
I'm interested if you had any luck with like any kind of literature review with the vegetable work that you were doing. Did you find anything similar to that in the past that people have done?
So with respect to all of our work, whether it's the climate change or whatever, we're sort of embracing the existing literature. We are clearly not the only people that are doing these kinds of things, right? And when you get out into that fruit and vegetable literature, you have an array of things. Like, for example, one study might just look at the effect of a nutrition education curriculum or something of that nature, right? So we're reading these papers and we're looking at them and we're seeing their results. And generally speaking, we're very consistent. We get some ideas from them, right? But generally speaking, mostly what guides my decisions from where I started was how did that last one go and who can I partner with and what do I want to try to do next, right? But all of our work has, obviously our published papers have a high degree of citations associated with them that link us to the literature. And what I would say is that there's so much different things that you could try to measure that you better just narrow it down to something simple, right? So there's nothing that we're doing that's out of line with whatever anybody else did. Our results fit in very nicely, and we actually build our work on top of other snack programs, right? So many people have been researching the USDA Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, and we're embedding ourselves in that literature, and I actually communicate with many of the people that are doing that work. And the same would go true for the climate change, right? Although some of these climate change people are pretty bigwigs, right? And they don't return my calls, you know, but yeah, we're familiarizing ourselves with the literature. And I think in particular with the climate change, reporting results on the US is not that important, right? Because lots of other people are doing that. But what we're trying to do is show that through our methodology, we get comparable results that other people get.